Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Anaiso Frank, the founder of QualitaX, and I am joined today by two guests. Before we get started with introductions, and as a reminder, on today's call, we'll explore the use of the Universal Digital Payments Network, UDPN for short, and how it supports regulated digital currency payments. So about the format, we'll have a presentation for 20-25 minutes, followed by a short conversation, and then we'll have a Q&A session to address attendees' questions. So please do not hesitate to share your questions in the chat as we go. Okay, let us get started with introduction. Should we start with you, Stefan? Could you tell us about your background and your current role as well?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks very much, Anasis, for having us today. So I'm very thrilled to explain a little bit more on UDPN. So my name is Stefan Schacher. I'm born in Germany, but I live since 20 years in Singapore. And I'm currently working for GFT. So GFT is a German-based system integration company, and which is primarily very strong in application building services in financial institutions. It's all the very complex, complicated, and innovative stuff. It's around blockchain implementations, cloud implementations, a lot of like AI technologies that we are providing. We are around 10,000 people strong. And yeah, so very happy today here to explain you a little bit more about UDPN.
Great, thank you. Tim, please.
Good, and I'm Tim Bailey, and again, thank you for having us here on the show. We're happy to be here and talk about the UDPN and answer questions. I head up our global business and operations for Red Date Technology. I'm American, but I'm based here in Hong Kong. And Red Date is a decentralized cloud infrastructure company. So we partner very well with the GFT team here, who focuses more on the SI space and on financial services. So thanks again for having us.
Okay, great. I think we'll start with a presentation first. So Tim, I will hand it over to you for the presentation.
Okay, let me share my screen here, and then Stefan is going to kick it off here, and I'll move slides, Stefan.
All right, thank you. Okay, Universal Digital Payments Network. So what it is essentially is a messaging infrastructure to facilitate cross-border payments, but not only in the retail space. We can operate use cases also in the wholesale area, in the interbank. And what UDPN actually is aimed to solve the challenge of interoperability. I would like to start with the first information that we are a live system. And I think it's very important because, as you might know, there's a lot of these initiatives ongoing. A cross-border payment system is definitely a huge market, especially in the area of like digital currencies, CBDCs in the future. There's a lot of players, but really UDPN is the leading infrastructure which is live. So we have started building UDPN, I think 2.5 to 3 years ago. We went live earlier this year in Davos throughout the World Economic Forum. And yeah, so we did this not only by ourselves. You find a couple of logos below there. These are the logos for financial institutions who have joined us from the beginning with a lot of like guidance, with a lot of like advice, with a lot of like requirements or wish list, because as we all know, there's a lot of these networks out there, but it's complicated for banks. It's very intransparent for the end user. It's slow. It's complex and it's expensive. And based on the feedback that we have received from many of these financial institutions, we have embarked a journey basically and started to build the components of UDPN. So together with GFT, the company that I work for, and together with them, we are basically aiming to create like a network effect, to create a network which is based not only on like one ownership, which has more also in terms of like governance. So if you would move to the next slide, Tim, I'd like you to display a little bit more on what the focus is for UDPN. So UDPN was designed in being an interoperable payments network for regulated digital currencies. I think it's very important to highlight that. So UDPN will not let any cryptocurrency participate. So it's especially designed for the regulated environment, which is approved by regulators within countries, which serves financial institutions, but which also protects a lot of like privacy and security issues that people are worried about who are transacting money today, right? So based on the DLT technology that UDPN is, it's also a network that is really designed to aim to drive efficiency, to make cross-border payments a lot faster, but also create transparency and basically bring the costs down. So within the next slide, I'd like to highlight a couple of points where the world of digital money is moving. So I think all of you are on the call will agree with us that money will be digital in some form or the other. So there will be lots of like digital currencies in forms of stablecoins, but also CBDCs coming out in the future. And what does it actually mean? Yeah, so there's a couple of like areas of interest that we are seeing. So it's definitely the speed and access. It's a lot what not only financial institutions demand and require, but also end users. In the world we are living today, that you send money from one country to another, and you are not really sure if the money is actually arriving. It takes a very long time. If there's like correspondent banks in between, it's very difficult to identify sometimes if something goes wrong. So it's just a system that is meant for disruption, right? Another part which is very important is also financial inclusion. So within digital wallets and being able to be connected to the internet, having mobile phones, having an app. So this definitely drives a lot of like unbanked and underbanked areas where CBDCs and stablecoin and also digital banking is reaching out and being connected to, and it just brings the world a lot closer, right? Very important also is programmable money. We just said like discussions about very interesting use cases in the trade finance area about like if there's a delivery happen, then the payment is released. If the delivery is not happen, what happens then? Very similar to purpose-bound money. A lot of like governments are using it for vouchers that they give it out. So there's a lot of like very, very good use cases for programmable money. This will all come along with digital currencies in form of smart contracts, which is very easy to do that. So UDPN is a beautiful platform to support that. Another aim is really the cost reduction itself. So many of us, if we transfer cash or money cross border, it's very expensive, right? There's a lot of like money to be spent on, I don't know, FX, on transfer cost itself, on the settlement. So it's time for change in this area. Yeah? Also the complexity itself, it's overwhelming. So a lot of new systems coming out. So for the end users itself, also for operators within financial institutions, sometimes very complex to learn and understand these new technologies. And obviously, within each conversation, you have areas of like trust and security, which needs to be on the core of that, because otherwise the adoption itself from the end user is not very high. So all of these things combined are basically coming along with like digital money itself. They will touch us in one form or the other. And we from GFT and Red Date have looked at a couple of trends out there in the market. And I would like to highlight this on the next slide. So what we are seeing, there's a lot of focus in the area of CBDCs. I think at the moment is around like 130 to 140 countries which are doing experiments around that, which are doing research, which are doing proof of concepts and pilots. I think if you read carefully the news, every week you find like 3 to 4 announcements within this area that there's some financial institutions or some countries doing something in one use case or another. So it's a lot of movement happening in the space. There's also a lot of like different requirements that we see. So not one country is the same than the other country. There's a lot of like similarities in approaches, but what we already identified, there's a lot of like different technologies and different requirements of offline payments, online payments only, wholesale in countries like Singapore itself. So Singapore itself has made it very clear they don't really see a need for retail CBDC, and probably they're right, because there's almost everyone has either 1 or 2 bank accounts, also either 1 or 2 mobile phones, and super fast connectivity in almost every household that you can find there. And money is treated in a form very digital already. So do you really need a retail CBDC? Probably not. But on the other hand, Singapore transfers a lot of cash cross border, and these are facilitated from like pictures from wholesale CBDC, for example. So there is a need to play, right? And many countries like India, in terms of like demographics, are looking very different on it, right? Another point is CBDCs will take some time to be live. There's a lot of like consideration, approval, legislation, regulatory approval necessary in the country itself. So what we see today, talking to many of our customers, not only in the area of banking business, so a lot of like e-commerce players, airlines, telco companies are actually looking in issuing their own stable coins, their own digital currency itself, in the form of loyalty points, in the form of vouchers, in the form of like tokenized deposit itself. So there's really a lot ongoing. We see also more and more liquidity flowing into stable coins as well. I think for the last couple of months, we had a very high jump. Also, like obviously driven from like the crypto window being almost over, or like we're going into a bull market again. So this obviously, this area helps also in a terms of regulated environment because it drives the technology adoption and usage. So I think this is really important to see that stable coins will definitely have a role to play in the future. Another point, which is very important, I think, is the cross-border payment transaction market. So I think it was in the year 2022 where there was spent almost 120 billion per annum just purely on transaction cost itself. And it's a very, very high number, right? And DLD adoption. So it's not only the small proof of concepts anymore. So what we see is really big system integrations, and there's there's a lot of them are happening. So people getting more familiar with the technology. It's not only like a buzzword, it's really coming down to the use cases where organizations identify where it can help them and where can it brings forward. Yeah. So in all of this combining together, it was for us the trigger point to build a new networks of payment. And the core principles on how we have designed UDPN, I would like to outline in the next slide. So UDPN itself is meant for entities. So entities who are operating in a regulated environment. So you will not have an app and connect with your mobile phone directly to UDPN. There will always be an entity of business in between, someone who is responsible, who does the KYC and AML processes. UDPN is only for digital currencies such as regulated stablecoins and CBDCs for cross-border payments. Again, there's no crypto running on the network. UDPN connects IT systems basically, and solves the issue or the challenge of interoperability from different kind of technologies. Another very important point, and also something that really separates us from other initiatives out there, is that UDPN is a decentralized governance environment. So essentially in Web3 terms is like a DAO. So what it means is basically governance decisions being something around the fee structure, be it something around which currency gets onboarded, what kind of businesses are part of UDPN, are done by smart contract voting from 24 alliance members. And these alliance members are the ones who are owning from the fee structure, but also are responsible for having governance decisions done on the network. And what we aim is that these 24 members of the alliance, and basically the owner of UDPN, spread out in a very geographic way. So we don't want to have like one continent only who is driving UDPN. We really want to have like a broader adoption, to have participants from US, participants from Latin America, participants from Europe, from Asia. And we also see this today in our POCs that we are running, that we really have this broad adoption. So we have financial institutions, but also like businesses who are interested in doing this payments with us and on UDPN. And this is how we have designed the network. And again, programmability, it's one point which is very, very important, because it will open up to use cases that we are not even able to envision today. There will be a lot of like very smart thinking from a lot of like very smart people within the financial environment coming up with these use cases. UDPN will also have a possibility to run this on them. So this leads to the architecture of UDPN, and I would like to ask Tim. Tim, could you tell us a little bit more about how UDPN is designed?
Sure, thanks, Stefan. So this is a simple overview of the architecture of UDPN. And if we look on the right, you'll see what we call transaction nodes. Transaction nodes are operated by currency operators. So it could be a central bank, it could be a regulated stablecoin operator, would operate a transaction node. And the transaction nodes is the way that currencies, digital currencies, get onboarded to the UDPN. On the left-hand side, you'll see what we call business nodes. Business nodes are operated by a commercial bank, a payment service provider, an enterprise. And think of the business nodes as the gateway to all of the digital currencies that have been onboarded onto the UDPN. Now, the transaction nodes and the business nodes are actually off-chain. So for security reasons, they're off-chain. In the center, you have the blockchain layer. And the UDPN right now uses Hyperledger Besu as a protocol, but we're blockchain protocol agnostic and we'll be integrating other protocols as well in the future. One of the probably most important characteristics of the UDPN that sets it apart from other projects, in addition to it being a real live infrastructure, is the application layer at the top. So the UDPN doesn't just transmit data from bank A to bank B to bank C. It also has the ability to process data. So in that application layer or runtime layer at the top, third parties like banks or other technology companies are able to deploy smart contract-based value-added services to do things like, foreign exchange or KYC. So that's an important element for us in the UDPN is we want to encourage innovation from the industry. So when we announced the UDPN at Davos in January of this year, we also announced that we were going to be running a series of 12 POCs, which we've been executing on now for 8 or 9 months. We've been operating POCs with over 30 different commercial banks, payment companies, professional services companies, law firms, and technology companies executing these POCs in the live sandbox that we have now running. And so part of the value of the POCs for the industry is it gives people, like banks, a hands-on experience with how all of this regulated payment technology really works. A lot of what's going on in the industry right now and what's getting a lot of press is white papers. And we've gone well beyond that with the real infrastructure where people can actually test things. And we also want to have as many industry participants as possible because we want to get input and feedback on the network and the services that we're building in there. So we would encourage anyone who is in the audience today who is interested in learning more about the UDPN or participating in one of the POCs to contact us at contact@udpn.io. You can also go up to udpn.io and get access to our white paper and even apply for a sandbox account. So a big part of us, Stefan and I talking to you here is to really, talk a bit about the UDPN, but also encourage more organizations to get involved. An example of the POCs we're running is a few weeks ago, Deutsche Bank and Standard Chartered, who have been working closely with us now for well over 2 years on the UDPN, issued a press release with the completion of the first POC that these two banks ran on the UDPN. It was a pretty simple POC, which is the digital currency transfer and swap. We have a number of other organizations involved in the UDPN, and then earlier this week, in fact, Standard Chartered, and G&D, Giesecke and Devrient, the German currency services provider, who has a CBDC product called Filia, actually again published a joint press release just talking about their experience in a central bank digital currency POC on the UDPN. So thank you again for the opportunity to do the presentation here. Again, if there's interest in either learning more about the UDPN or getting involved in one of our POCs, please don't hesitate to contact us. So let me turn it back over to you and see if there are any questions or conversation.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for sharing the work that your team is doing. This is very insightful. And I do have a couple of questions. So should I start with the most challenging one first? Yes, okay. So there are well-established players in the payment and messaging infrastructure space, and they are really aiming to leverage their current infrastructure or extend their existing infrastructure to offer capabilities similar to what the UDPN is doing. And I think you touched upon this, but in terms of the value proposition, is it really the governance model and the fact that the UDPN network is built on DLT first, like natively, that really deliver the added benefits in terms of delivering on the requirements that you mentioned in the presentation?
It's a great question. I think there are a few points I'd like to make, and then maybe Stefan can build upon that. I think there are a few key things that differentiate the UDPN from existing networks and infrastructure. One is that the UDPN is designed from the grounds up for regulated digital currencies. A lot of existing networks were really built decades ago,
Yes,
and were designed around the financial systems that existed 40 or 50 years ago, not the financial systems of tomorrow. So I think that's the first key point, is it's built for the ground up for digital payments. The second key point is the UDPN doesn't just transmit messages, which I think is kind of the basic function for some of the legacy financial communication networks that exist today. The UDPN does that, but it also processes data, right? So and it has a layer for innovation for the industry participants to innovate and build their own smart contract-based value-added services. So we wanted to build in that innovation layer, because GFT and Red Date and the other partners we're working with don't necessarily have a monopoly on new ideas and innovation. So we wanted to have that. The third key point that I would make is the UDPN has been 3 years in the making so far. And I think when you scratch the surface behind a lot of press releases and announcements that come out, in a lot of cases, there is no real technology behind it. It's all kind of theoretical and academic. So I think that's another key thing that differentiates the UDPN from some existing legacy projects or things that you may have seen in the news. Stefan, did you want to add any other points?
Yeah, so maybe one point in terms of really interoperability. So from the diverse set of use cases that we see today, so we do see a lot of demand in the area of retail. Of course, we do see a lot of demand in the area of wholesale CBDCs, but also interbank use cases. We do have demands for private or for country-specific UDPNs. So it's really you can envision it almost as a layer 0 for digital payments, so to say. So other settlement applications or other infrastructure provider can actually sit on top of UDPN and make use of the infrastructure itself. And when you go in the technology perspective, so it's not only the bridges to other blockchains environment, even if they are private, if they are public, we are also able to connect environments and CBDCs which are coming from the non-blockchain environment. And this is especially when you have areas or like countries who are going into a CBDC area where you need offline payments, for example. You might want to have centralized systems. We do see demands for that. So configuration of possibilities in terms of like what kind of use cases, what kind of technologies, what kind of process are getting very, very high and very demand. And UDPN is also really the only one who approaches this from a universal perspective to cater and connect all of them. And this is also something that really sets us apart from other initiatives out there.
Okay, that's great.
Maybe one last point is, and you mentioned it briefly, which is the decentralized governance is an important part of it, right? As Stefan said during his part of the presentation, we'll announce early next year the initial 6 founding members of the UDPN Alliance, which will be split between technology companies and financial services organizations, and will be geographically diverse. Eventually, we'll go to 24. And so I think that's one thing that also separates it from other, kind of payment network ecosystems where you may have one bank with, a token, an intermediary token, an ecosystem, or a tokenized deposit services, but it's really all within that single bank's ecosystem rather than a more industry-wide, geographically diverse approach, which is what we're doing.
Yes, that's great. I can see that Fabricio has a question. Fabricio, do you want to speak, or should we just address your question in the chat? I guess we can. So, as some of your next VOC project to do something in connection to BCE, CBDC, recent, okay, call for it. Oh, you can speak at the moment. Okay. So is it clear what BCE is? I'm clear on CBDCs, but can you just develop what you mean? Please.
I'm not so sure about both terms, BCE and
TW. If you could just let us know what this is. And in the meantime, I will ask another question. So yes, it was great that because UDPN integrates with existing IT systems. So when it comes to existing standard as well, such as the ISO 222, are you exploring this in the different POCs as well?
Yeah. So the ISO standard itself, it's in the area of payment itself. So if you look at the area of like a simple infrastructure sending messages across, there would not be applicable standard yet in the form of digital assets, so to say. So within the area of fiat money, obviously the standard is there. Yep. So we do have POCs that we are providing to basically especially look at the current messaging standards, use them, and basically transact them on the UDPN network. So from our perspective, it's not a problem at all. We are very confident that it's possible. We offer currently a POC in that area. It's our POC number 4. And if anybody would be interested, we are looking at the moment for financial institutions who would like to do that. But essentially, on the current legacy systems, the way you're doing it, sending your payments, you just redirect it to a different API. You use the same standard. You can send it across UDPN, and it will reach the same destination as required.
Okay, great. So we talked a lot about financial institution banking, but have you seen some interest from other industry like insurance, telecom, maybe airline, because all of those industries do have a need for from a cross-border payment perspective?
Yeah, so I think I briefly touched on it, and it's essentially these kind of like verticals that you just mentioned who have interest as well. So we have just engaged in a POC with an insurance use case that we are running in around Southeast Asia. We do have interest from like some of the larger airlines in the Southeast Asia region who do have a huge user base and who would like to initiate and receive payments basically. The same counts for telco companies. Telco companies itself, they do have a high interest in terms of like initiating these payments, but also receiving it, combining it with like loyalty approaches that they have. They do have some of these telcos actually offering point of sale systems, and they're looking for a way on how to integrate them. So we do have a demand there. And yeah, we have in our use case portfolio, a use case which especially describes the connection between e-commerce companies who are using the bank as a kind of like banking as a service. So imagine if the wallet itself sits with the e-commerce provider. The e-commerce provider itself has a large number of user base, but having a lot of like people ordering abroad and having to make these payments directly to the retailer, to the seller, for example. How would it look like if you use UDPN and the bank itself as a payment gateway for that? So there's different scenarios and different approaches. Some of the e-commerce provider obviously do have a platform and would like to control all the payments by himself, but they still have flags on like how do they get the money in and how do they get it out. So for them, UDPN would be an interest. So we do see interest in not only financial institutions, but really in a lot of different kind of like businesses, especially the ones who are having large interests in facilitating payments for their user guide. And we do have some of the large companies, they say, hey, I would like to directly out of my SAP ERP systems, put out orders, receiving quotations, putting out like programmability on the environment of like how I'm running today my enterprise resource systems and connect it straight away to a payment facilitation network. So all of these use cases do exist. There's like conversations ongoing, and this is what we do with businesses besides financial institutions at the moment.
Okay, that's great to know. So I want to go back to Fabrizio's question. So Fabrizio, you shared a link related to the Eurosystem POCs. So I'm still not clear what BCE and NTW stand for. So I guess the question could be, are you involved, or is UDPN as a project involved at all in those in these initiatives?
Okay, so I just clicked the link. So this is the Banco Central Europe, so European Central Bank. So within Europe itself, there's quite a lot of initiatives going on around digital currencies. It's not only Europe itself, it's also digital pound, for example. We do work together with organizations like the Digital Euro Association, the Digital Pound Association. We do have quite a lot of traction in the area of, I would call it like banking consortiums, which are looking to facilitate or to issue the stable coin from not only from a single entity. Then obviously there's a lot of interest from not only the academic level in Europe itself, and yeah, so there's quite some stuff ongoing within Europe. I think as mentioned, one of the first one was Deutsche Bank, which basically went public with us on a press release, so to say. We are not directly yet working with the Central Bank of Europe. Is almost each of the country, be it Germany, France, Italy, and England as well. There's actually stuff ongoing, and yeah. So sometimes from a regulator perspective, in terms of like POCs, it's very difficult for them to commit. Most of the time, we see more interest from financial institutions itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's great. Thank you. So I have a bit of a technical question, actually, because you mentioned that the UDPN, that was a team mentioned, the UDPN is using Hyperledger Besu protocol. So basically an open source enterprise Ethereum client. Why this choice initially? And why now broadening to support other protocols?
Yeah, well, so we chose Hyperledger Besu as the first protocol we used because you know, of EVM compatibility and the ecosystem around it, but also because it's open source, and we work, you know, we're a member of the Linux Foundation. We work very closely, and the Hyperledger Foundation. We work very closely with those organizations, and we're, you know, very strong proponents of open source as a technology. That being said, we do plan to integrate other protocols into the UDPN, but the initial development was done on Besu.
Okay, does it mean that UDPN will also open source some or all of its code? What is the current approach to maybe giving back to the open source community as well? It's a bit of a tricky question, I know.
No, so we will. We'll certainly open source parts of the UDPN. There are some parts that we won't open source for security reasons. So for example, you remember the diagram that I showed earlier, where you have on the right transaction nodes, which are operated by a central bank, like a currency operator. Those transaction nodes will be customized to the unique technologies and needs of central banks and stablecoin operators. So for security reasons, that's one piece of the network that we would not open source. But certainly, the business node and other elements of it, will be open source.
Okay, that's great. You probably noticed earlier this week we had a couple of news. The first one was that Societe Generale launched its own stablecoin, so backed by the euro on the Ethereum network. We had JP Morgan, who added programmability to the GPM coin. So I think now they are processing 100 billion worth of transaction daily. So going into 2024, and with all of this momentum happening in the industry, what type of, I would say, items will you prioritize? And what are the key elements on the roadmap that you feel comfortable sharing with us at the moment?
So let me start, then you can put
yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
What we really believe in 2024, there will be a massive amount of new digital currencies coming out. So Societe Generale was the first one that went public for it. There's a lot of organizations which do have quite advanced tests in terms of like proof of concepts or pilots ongoing within their own organizations. Many of them are quite vocal and publicly about it, that you already have heard about it, but many also do it a little bit in an enclosed environment and do not tell everyone what they are doing. So what we believe in 2024, there will be a lot of these like technologies and approaches of stablecoins coming to the market. There will be a lot of more new use cases coming up, especially in the complex, I would say DVP and PVP, so delivery versus payment and payment versus payment settlement area. There's also, I think, an area where there's a lot of like commercial banks and especially regulators moving from small POCs into really big sandboxes where they can connect not only, let's say, a small tokenization engine, but actually the entire value chain from end to end within a sandbox environment. So it's basically having more financial institutions, having more regulators connected, having the term of like interoperability really tested and proven. It's, I think, the connection of different systems and different use cases in a whole broader ecosystem itself.
Okay. So how do you decide, because it's a DAO? So in terms of giving priority to onboarding new stablecoin, can you share with us maybe the voting system, the threshold, or things like that?
Yeah, so I can talk about that. So
okay.
Within the UDPN, we have what's called the UDPN Alliance, which is initially 6, eventually 24 members. Each of those alliance members operates a validator node in the network. So it's not only the governance that's decentralized, but it's also the operation of the network, right? So that gives it a resiliency, because it's not just, a network that's owned and controlled by one entity. It's decentralized. And so the voting mechanism will actually be run through the validator nodes. So each member who operates a validator node, there will be, topics that are put up to vote, and then they will vote via that mechanism. There are different thresholds based on, different types of topics, right? For example, to admit a new member as the UDPN Alliance, requires, a pretty high threshold. Like I think it's something like 80% or something like that. Whereas, something more, minor in terms of governance would require a lower threshold. But every, the onboarding or, bringing on a new alliance member, onboarding a new digital currency, changing the commercial structure or fees on the network, all of those things are put to a vote, and each member has an equal vote. just because GFT and Red Date were the two initiators of the network, our vote is the same as everyone else's vote.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. I just want to go to the audience and make sure that everybody, if there are any questions, the time is about now to ask for a couple of seconds. Well, if there are no questions, so before I conclude, Tim, Stefan, thank you very much. Is there anything else that you would like to share before we close?
I just wanted to thank you and the organization for having us here, and thank you to the audience for joining. Again, if anyone is interested in what we're doing with the UDPN and want to learn more, want to participate in our POCs or even learn more about them, please contact us at the email address that we've got on here, contact@udpn.io, or you can contact Stefan or me through LinkedIn.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to you, Tim and Stefan. Thank you to all attendees for joining us, and thank you for listening today. I hope it was valuable and insightful, and I hope to see you for our next webinar of the series to discuss more innovations in the financial market infrastructures. So thank you again, and bye for now, everyone.